Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Winkler from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rule 3.33, designated Thursday, January 14th, 2021, for adoption of permanent rules of the House and has established a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to these rules. Report from the Committee on Rules.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Winkler from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration offers the following report and moves its adoption. Resolved that the permanent rules of the House of Representatives for the 92nd session shall read as follows.
A copy of these are online. Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Last Thursday, we adopted temporary rules of the House, which established the committees and essentially kept the previous set of rules in place. The Rules Committee met this week on Monday to consider these permanent rules. We reviewed a number of amendments and had a relatively short discussion, and the rules passed out of committee. There are a few amendments that have been pre-filed today, but I want to start by thanking the Republican caucus and the new Republican caucus for cooperation in bringing these rules forward with relatively little controversy in comparison to what we've seen in years past. When I was first in the House in 2007 and 2008, a new DFL majority was in charge. Republicans had been in charge of the House for 8 years, and I think they had a lot of feelings to work out. Because we regularly spent 18 hours in debate on every major omnibus bill. All-nighters were standard. Considering 90 amendments on a bill was pretty much typical, and the place was completely out of control, leading finally to a motion to call the previous question, which erupted in a total nuclear meltdown of the Minnesota House. As a result of that experience, in 2009 and 10, the majority experimented with a time limit on debate, which basically allowed the minority to tell us how long they wanted to debate a bill and to continue it. That didn't work out so well either, and the minority never accepted. In 11 and 12, Republicans were in charge and got rid of the time limit concept, and then I think regretted it. In 13 and 14, we tried this new 24-hour rule under Speaker Thiessen and a new DFL majority. There was a lot of consternation about it, but when it came to it in the 15 and 16 and 17 and 18 bienniums, when Representative Daudt was Speaker, the 24-hour rule remained in place. It remains in place today. And despite a number of back and forth over the years over how the rules should be put in place, I think we have now arrived at a point in time where the rules pretty well reflect respecting the right of the minority party to have debate and respecting the right of the majority party to run the House and have votes on bills. So it feels like we are at a place of détente on rules arguments based on what we've been seeing so far this year, and I encourage members to vote for the permanent rules and continue this pattern of cooperation. We can disagree, we can disagree strongly, we can have a very serious debate, but we can respect our staff, we can respect each other, and we can do better work in the House than we have in years past, and I think these rules reflect that aspiration. I ask for your support.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Barr moves to amend the proposed permanent rules of the House for the 92nd session as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
The member from Anoka, Representative Barr, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, the A1 amendment changes the ability of any committee to combine bills together and the House to combine bills together into the massive omnibus bills that have caused so much consternation over the years. As the majority leader just pointed out, there was 90 and 100 amendments and amendments to amendments on omnibus bills as they passed through the House. Since I have been in the House, it has been one of my main priorities to end the practice of omnibus bills. And as such, I've done a lot of digging into what used to happen in the House years prior, maybe in some cases many years prior. But to put this in context, I'm going to go back to the 68th legislature, which was the 73-74 biennium. There was 3,730 bills submitted in the biennium, and 1,366 were actually passed through both chambers and signed into law by the governor. Contrast that with the most recent legislature, the 91st, which was the 1920 biennium. There were 5,156 bills submitted, so an increase of about 70 some odd percent, and a grand total of 151 were signed into law, and that includes all 7 special sessions. So the more we combine these bills together, the more consternation it causes, the more it holds things that we all agree on or have a mass majority, 100 plus type of agreement, very bipartisan, cross aisle kind of agreement, holds those things hostage for the few things that are actually truly controversial politically from one side of the aisle to the other. And by adopting this amendment, it doesn't prevent anything from going forward. It simply says we're going to have a little more accountability, a little more transparency. And at the end of the day, the voting public will have a much better idea of where each of us stands on all of the issues that are before us today. So the A1 amendment says that you cannot combine a bill. You'll still be able to separate it, and that it will still have to, if it's separated, it still has to fall into all the budget constraints. And I would request a roll call, please, Madam Speaker.
Representative Barr requests a roll call. There are not 15 members in the chamber, so there can't be 15 hands in the chamber. So if members would like to raise their hand for a roll call on the Barr A1 amendment, please send an email from your official House email account to hands@house.mn with the word hands in the subject line, and we will give you 60 seconds. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the A1 amendment. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Munson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of this amendment. This is also one of the central things that I believe we can do to improve the legislature and bring more transparency and accountability to government. So many people are frustrated with the inaction of the legislature and why everything comes to the floor in such a hyper-partisan manner. And it's because there's a lot of really good legislation out there that's bipartisan in nature. But unfortunately, really good bipartisan bills get wrapped with a bunch of really hyper-partisan junk. It's also a place where lobbyists and special interest groups like to decorate a good bipartisan bill with a bunch of ornaments and legislation that would never pass the legislature on its own because it is so extremely bad for the districts. But because it's attached to the bills in creating these big omnibus bills, it passes the legislature. Omnibus bills are used to roll the minority, right? The majority party can bring stuff to the floor and just keep on attaching partisan legislation to it until it's just unpalatable for the minority to not vote for it, and they'll take a few off, and then it passes. Again, a bunch of really bad legislation passes in this manner. Allowing bills to go through committee individually is important. A lot of the freshmen that have come into the legislature will soon find out that you've chosen to be on a committee so that you can bring your voice and bring your district's interests forward and vote on bills in the committee. But most of the votes in the committee don't happen. Most of the bills, really important ones that people get passionate about and want to speak to and bring in testifiers, the bill will be rolled over for possible inclusion in the committee's omnibus bill. So you actually don't even get to vote on that bill that you brought forward or that someone else brought forward that you work to improve and vote on. And so there's no accountability, there's no transparency, and we empower the committee chairs to construct these omnibus bills in violation of our state constitution, which Representative Barr addressed specifically, but we have a requirement for single subject bills. And many of us vote against the omnibus bills on principle because they are unconstitutional in constructing these enormous, massive bills that are multiple subjects. So again, I am such in favor of this amendment. And this is one thing that we can truly do to improve the legislative process and to allow the bipartisan legislation, the really good legislation, to get through and to prevent special interest groups and the lobbyists who control and write so much of the legislation here at the Capitol from getting this legislation through by attaching bad bills to good ones. So I would urge members, people are watching, we're bringing more transparency into this process. And as we saw with these enormous federal spending bills, when people actually sit down and read what's in these enormous bills that are constructed, they're upset. And to make more of your constituents happy, let's vote on every bill individually. And I know that legislators will say that we don't have time to sit and vote on 100 different bills, but we bring one omnibus bill forward that's hundreds and hundreds of pages long and includes dozens, if not hundreds of bills. And the minority party usually brings forward amendments to strike dozens and dozens of portions of that bill anyways, to force your vote on the floor to try to get people on record to vote on some of those things. But we could just vote on these bills individually. So this is really a vote for transparency and accountability in government. And it is something that your constituents really want. We don't just do this in the minority. Representative Barr and I also voted against omnibus bills in the majority. And we campaign with 1,000-page bills to show people what a horrible concoction that we allow here at the legislature in violation of our Constitution. So members, please vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And while this may have some merit, I do have some questions. Would Representative Barr yield, please?
Representative Barr, will you yield for a question?
I will.
He will yield. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Barr. I've heard references to bills of the same subject and separating the bills. In my particular area of interest, the Capital Investment Committee, are you suggesting that all of the bonding bills should be presented individually on the floor of the House?
Representative Barr.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker and Representative Erdahl, the way this rule is written, I believe that they would need to be each submitted separately, but I also believe that you could take, during the committee, you could take all of your requests. So if they were all like PFA requests or highway fund requests or building roofs on buildings requests, you could bundle those in a committee bill and rewrite a bill from scratch, give it its first reading as it's going through the committee process, and bring that to the floor in smaller pieces.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Barr, that an interesting proposal. I'm also wondering, when you say a single subject, in a bonding bill, would that mean just GO bonds, or can appropriation bonds, cash, trunk highway bonds, would they be allowed in a capital investment bill?
Representative Barr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Erdahl, My personal definition of single subject is probably not the same as everybody else's, but and the Supreme Court, this is one of the problems that in the past, the Supreme Court, when presented with clarifying the single subject clause, has refused to define single subject, and they said that's a job of the legislature. So I would suggest that that is a debate worth having. As you presented it with GO bonds, trunk highway fund bonds, I believe that that would probably be a good basis for a start on a discussion of the whole House on how we define that. That's probably a pretty clear delineation and easier to understand from one legislature to the next.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Barr. I think it's a good idea to bring this forward. It'll foment an interesting debate and a discussion that I think has been needed. So thank you, Representative Barr, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion to the amendment. Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, members, I urge a no vote on the A1 amendment. Representative Barr has certainly been consistent in his advocacy for it year in and year out. The challenge that we face is that we have roughly 2.5 months between when we get the forecast and when we adjourn to enact a budget that touches every part of the state and many people's lives, and it consumes billions and billions of dollars. To do so individually is simply not practical. Abusing the single subject rule, of course, is something that both sides have done, and both sides should attempt not to do in the future, especially for supplemental budget bills. So, as with many of these rules, the rule itself isn't the problem, it's how it is applied and the discipline that members bring to using the rules properly. So, I would ask for a no vote, and I would ask that we continue our cooperation in making the rules of the House function the way that they should, rather than using them to abuse each other and staff in the way that we engage in with our debate.
Any further discussion to the Barr A1 amendment? Seeing none, a roll call having been requested, the clerk will open the roll.
You are on.
Madam Speaker, Haley votes yes.
Hold on just a second, Representative Haley. We're going to go to the calling the roll in just a minute.
Albright. Albright.
Albright votes aye.
Albright votes aye. Backer.
Backer votes aye.
Backer votes aye. Barr. Barr.
Barr votes aye.
Barr votes aye. Baker.
Baker votes aye.
Baker, aye. Berg.
Berg votes nay.
Berg, no. Bierman.
Chairman, no.
Bierman, no. Bo.
Bo votes aye.
Bo, aye. Christensen.
Christensen, no.
Christensen, no. Davids.
Davids, no.
Davids, no. Eklund. Eklund.
Eklund, no.
Eklund, no. Erickson.
Erickson votes aye.
Erickson, aye. Feist.
Heist, no.
Feist, no. Franzen.
Franzen voted yes. I'm on the board.
Franzen, aye. Grossel.
Grossel, aye.
Grossel, aye. Gruenhagen.
Gruenhagen, aye.
Gruenhagen, aye. Haley.
Haley, aye.
Haley, aye. Hanson.
Hanson, R, no.
Hanson, R, no. Hausman.
Hausman, no.
Hausman, no. Heinrich.
Heinrich, aye.
Heinrich, aye. Heinzman.
Heinzman, aye.
Heinzman, aye. Cleavorn.
Seaborn, no.
Cleavorn, no. Lee.
Lee, no.
Lee, no. Lislegard.
Listlegard, no.
Lislegard, no. Long.
Long, no.
Long, no. Mariani.
Mariani, no.
Mariani, no. Mason.
No.
Mason, no. Morrison.
Morrison, no.
Morrison, no. Murphy. Murphy.
Murphy, no.
Murphy, no. Novotny.
Devani, aye.
Novotny, aye. Pulowski.
Pulowski, no.
Pulowski, no. Sandell. Sandell. Schultz.
Schultz votes no.
Schultz, no. Sundin.
Sundin, no.
Sundin, no. Thompson. Thompson. Thompson.
Thompson, no.
Thompson, no. Torkelson.
Torkelson, aye.
Torkelson, aye. Vang.
They no.
Vang, no. West.
West, aye.
West, aye. Zhang Ti.
Zhang T, no.
Zhang Ti, no. Joachim.
Joachim, no.
Joachim, no. Sandell.
Bill, no.
Sandell, no.
Madam Speaker,
Please state your name.
this is Representative Miller.
Representative Miller,
point of order.
do you wish to change your vote?
No, this is just a clarification. I think it's a point of order. I'm not seeing nor heard recorded Representative Mortensen's vote.
Representative Miller, the only thing in order right now is for you to tell me what your vote is. Just give us a minute. We're working with the new technology.
Mortensen.
Mortensen, aye.
Mortensen, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 72 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Barr moves to amend the proposed permanent rules of the House for the 92nd session as follows, and the amendment is coded A2.
The member from Anoka, Representative Barr, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A2 amendment makes a slight modification in the amendment to the amendment process. As the rules currently read that amendments must be filed by noon the day prior to the floor hearing, and amendments to the amendment would be 6 hours later, so it'd be 6 p.m. the day prior. Many of us have afternoon committee meetings, and finding enough time to read and process and actually think through something in that 6 hour period many times becomes just physically impossible to do. So this amendment would change the 6 hour rule to 30 minutes prior to the start of next session. So everything would still be pre-filed before session starts. It still gives the chief clerk time to actually get things electronically posted so all members can see amendments to the amendments. They could still be caucused, and it provides a little more time and a little more flexibility for all members to have a chance to read through the proposed amendments and see if there's any amendments to those amendments they would like to make.
Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, members, I urge a no vote on the Barr amendment. Having a 24-hour rule in place does not prohibit members from offering amendments or amendments to amendments. It only requires that they do their work ahead of time and not surprise everyone on the day of or during the minute of. And a 30-minute amendment period prior to a floor session doesn't allow time for careful consideration. So members, I ask for a no vote on the Barr amendment, and members should have ample opportunity to be able to respond to the bills that are coming to the floor.
Any discussion to the A2 amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, please say no.
Aye.
No.
The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Drazkowski moves to amend the proposed permanent rules for the 92nd session as follows. The amendment is coded A6.
The member from Wabasha, Representative Drazkowski, to your amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I have been in the legislature since 2000. My first full legislative session was 2008, and Majority Leader Winkler outlined a lot of the history of the 24-hour rule earlier. But I was able to serve before we had a 24-hour rule. And I found that this 24-hour rule not only reduces the spontaneous ability for us to make decisions based on new information. Madam Speaker and members, the limited number of people that serve on the committee that the bill goes through don't have all the information. They're not the corner of the market on the information or intelligence or experience around particular parameters of any bill that comes before this legislature. There's 134 members in the Minnesota House, and we find numerous times in our discussion that we get hogtied in the House because of this rule and our inability to be flexible and spontaneous and responsive to new information when it gets there. And this will happen again this session multiple times, and we will wonder, why do we have this rule at that point, and feel very much confounded by it. The rule itself, the way it plays out, members, is that you will find yourself querying your constituents about particular items around a bill less because there's a 24-hour rule in place. What happens is a 24-hour rule comes into effect, the amendments are placed, the amendments to the amendments are placed after that. No more can be offered. The lobbyists, members, get a chance to look at those amendments and amendments to the amendment. They weigh in with the leadership of both of the caucuses, or all of the caucuses, before the bill gets to the floor. And so at least some caucuses operate in a way that they go through the bill, and you will remember this, and if you're a new member, you will experience it soon as bills start coming to the House floor. The bill will be brought before you by the leadership for discussion, and there will be a recommendation that will come out of that leadership of about how to vote on that amendment. People will have a piece of paper in front of them with the amendments on them, and there will be a little blank even way on the right side for you to write yes or no next to that amendment. So members, before that happens, the lobbyists have already weighed in. They've weighed in with the leadership. They've influenced their recommendation to you in your caucus before you get to the House floor. And then when you get to the House floor, you will find that you've got the sheet in front of you. Oh, I remember I need to vote no on this. You may not be listening very close to the discussion at hand, certainly not as close as you would be if we didn't have the 24-hour rule. And you will find that you are not reading into the bills and studying them to the depth that you would otherwise. I found this with myself, and I've caught myself and have had to force myself to read the bills and be studious, where when I first came, the first few years before this rule was instituted, I found that it was a normal part of your behavior on the floor to be proactive, reading the bill, inquiring about specific items in the bill, and being fully in tune with the bill, whether you were part of that committee discussion or not. We don't have that anymore with the 24-hour rule. What we have is a list that's influenced by the lobbyists, not influenced to the extent that it was originally without the rule, by our constituents, our own thought and discussion with people back in the district. So for those reasons, members, I would encourage you to support this amendment. It will get rid of the 24-hour rule, allow us the flexibility, bring a more robust discussion, debate, take the shackles off of the rhetorical activity of the legislature around bills that actually forms them and brings about the great things that can be brought about in legislation that are limited by this 24-hour rule. So, Madam Speaker, members, for those reasons, I encourage you to support the amendment. And Madam Speaker, I'd request a roll call.
Representative Drazkowski requests a roll call. Given there are not 15 members in the chamber, if you would like to raise your hand, please send an email from your official House email account to hands@house.mn. There are not 15 hands. There will not be a roll call. Discussion to the amendment. The member from Blue Earth, Representative Munson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I'm disappointed that we didn't have 15 members of this this body who were willing to be on the record of voting whether or not you want to actually be able to have constructive conversations and debate and amendments on the floor. Many people will think, well, how could you possibly read all the bills and have a discussion and actually follow along and amend stuff on the floor? Well, I would encourage all of you to, at some point during the legislative session, walk over to the Senate and see how they do it, because they don't have a 24-hour rule. And the majority party brings a bill to the floor. The minority party offers an amendment. Sometimes it's partisan, but after a thorough debate, there can be compromise. There's actually people working across the aisle to improve legislation and not just try to have the majority party steamroll the minority party and pass legislation. There's actually debate back and forth, an amendment and an amendment back, and actually improving legislation, which last I checked was our job. It wasn't just to sit in the minority and push no. It was actually to work to a compromise between two sides of this legislature to improve legislation. And you can't do that when everything has to be posted 24 hours in advance. And all the lobbyists, as Representative Drazkowski said, read the bills and start phoning in their influence to try to control how you vote. It also, removing the 24-hour rule would take away power from the triumvirate of the legislature, from the leadership to tell you how to vote. And I know it's frustrating because we have COVID here and we're not on the House floor, but when you are bringing forward an amendment that you're passionate about for your district, and you're standing up and you're speaking, and no one is listening because they've already been told how to vote. They already have their yes and no on this amendment and that amendment to the amendment written down on their desk. That's frustrating. And that is not good governance. And when your constituents talk about how you're not working across the aisle and how there's everything seems to be so hyper partisan on the floor, it's because we can't amend the bills on the floor. Everything that we do on the floor, it's theatrics, unless we change this rule. It's just theater because you've already been told how to vote. And so if you want to take back your power to actually read bills and offer amendments and constructively improve legislation, voting yes on this amendment is very important. And it would restore our power to actually work across the aisle and improve legislation during debate on the floor. So thank you, members, and I encourage a yes vote. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And my time in serving the people of my area was before the 24-hour rule. And I remember as a freshman, there was a debate and a constituent contacted me, and I was able to work together, and I can't remember the person from the other side of the aisle, but we did an amendment, and we got it entered, and helped move things along. And frankly, each of the first two times we tried to amend the rules and add this, and it was changed to add the 24-hour rules, there was bipartisan members that felt we needed to allow for the spontaneity of debate, to have an input, to come together and find resolutions. I understand it's a lot easier when you can finish up by 10 or midnight, but sometimes important issues require us to spend that little extra effort, put in that extra work. And frankly, if you're not on a committee, you tend to miss out on some of the debate and discussion on the issues. And so I, again, will support removing the 24-hour rule. And I am saddened that we won't have a roll call so people can see that there are members that like to have the capability of a debate which makes a change and brings about improvement. Thank you.
The member from Candio High, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, you know, there's an irony that I'm hearing today. Today is the day that we pass the rules of good order that was mentioned by the majority leader, good governance, good legislating. I, along with probably all other members, but certainly the vast majority of us, ever since I've been elected, people have continually said, do things the way they're supposed to be done. And what they mean by that is do things that we would probably find the proper way to run things. And the rules of the House always pull on that tension because we do need to get certain things done. Majority Leader Winkler had said, you know, we've only got a little bit of time to pass a lot of stuff, and that's why we do this and that. And that there's a level of truth to some of that stuff. But the amendments that are being brought forward today are without a doubt an effort to bring forward transparency and certainly good governance. And I, like Representative Quam and the others that have spoken so far, there's a real irony for me that we couldn't even get 15 hands raised saying we want people to know how we vote on good governance. So in order to find out if we vote on good governance, we're going to hide behind the 15 hands to not even show anyone that we vote on. With 15 hands, under normal circumstances, the best we could do is say, I don't think someone raised their hand, but that's not even official. We don't know who did or didn't raise hands. So in the dark of Zoom, we decided to hide how we stand even on being transparent to the people of our district. It's very frustrating. It's politics as usual. When I was in the majority, the Democrats said stuff like this is politics as usual. Now we're in the minority, and so we yell politics as usual, and everyone yells politics as usual. But we are the people who have the election certificates. We are the ones that have the ability to change and do these things better. So I'm disappointed the way this goes for people that are watching. So we can add a little transparency. This is likely not going to pass, especially since there's not a roll call. But once again, we are stepping in the direction of a handful of people that are going to make the decisions on very important things. And certainly the most serious year since I've been in office, probably the most serious year the legislature has seen in many, many years. And most people aren't going to know what's going on. So this is a sad time that I know this likely probably wouldn't have been passed. We need to continue this conversation because I think the 24-hour rule is one of those things that get in the way of good governance. But it's certainly a very sad day that we have basically almost no representatives out of 134 to think that we should even vote on this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I think the amendment itself illustrates the value of having a 24-hour rule. This amendment was not offered in committee, and there was no opportunity to discuss it there. It has been offered on the floor, and we knew about it ahead of time, so that's some advantage, I guess. And members, all this requires is that you be a little bit prepared instead of doing something at the last second based on kind of an inspiration or a feeling. I kind of like the old days, the Wild West of the Minnesota House floor. It's a great training ground if you want to be quick on your feet and figure out what to do in a short amount of time. But if you want to deal with an amendment that comes on the fly without notice, all you have to do is line up a few speakers who can talk for a period of time, and then the same group of people can sit down and look at the amendment and figure out how to make recommendations. It doesn't change anything substantively. It doesn't give anybody any different level of power or any different level of information, except that it allows us to actually know ahead of time what's coming and to be able to evaluate it. So members, we should vote no. As I said at the beginning, this rule has stood the test of time and has allowed the House of Representatives to be a little bit more of a civil place that allows us to be better to each other and to make better laws because we know what we're voting on. And that seems to me something that our constituents would want us to do.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Hertaus.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for all of your comments on this issue. I would like to just contribute one additional point that makes supporting this amendment very viable, and that is our constituents are not legislators. And oftentimes these bills and the amendments get posted. They come home from work. They actually take time to be a good citizen and will open up their laptop and they'll look at what's posted. And suddenly, after the 24-hour rule has lapsed, suddenly you get this phone call from a constituent who's hysterical about a proposal to amend something or that it needs to be amended. And you have to tell them, well, I'm sorry, your voice doesn't matter. I can't be your representative because the 24-hour rule has passed. That's very frustrating for our constituents to hear. They send us to St. Paul. They expect us to act on their behalf. And we can't control or regulate how quickly they get to us. But oftentimes, the bills are never posted with that much time for those who are not legislators to understand exactly what's happening and what's going on. So I'd like everybody to just think about that. It is a problem. And lastly, with regard to some of the debates on the floor and the amendments, suddenly there is new information. And it's even something that you can support with regard to the amendment, and that maybe it goes on, but oftentimes it just needs one little tweak, because that all of us get text messages and emails from our constituents during the live Act the Floor session. And so oftentimes there's really good input from our constituents, and it's just too late. You can't make the changes. So I think that's the frustrating part for me about the 24-hour rule. Thank you, Representative Drazkowski, for bringing this forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, I need to speak to this today because I might be one of the most well-known opponents of the 24-hour rule in the Minnesota House. And so I just want to speak today to let members know that this isn't a partisan issue, although it does seem to be one from the kind of discussion we're having here today, where it seems like only Republicans think the 24-hour rule should go away. A little bit of history: when this was first started under Speaker Thiessen, I was opposed to it then. And I was very vocal about it, and resisting a lot of pressure, I voted against it. At that time, the minority, the Republicans, were so incensed by this rule. They thought for sure this was to squelch the minority. There were even tears in the House of Representatives that this was like the end of democracy. Well, lo and behold, I think it was a couple years later, the Republican majority passed the same rule. It was not the end of democracy as we know it. So I am still, just to let you all know, I'm still going to vote on a voice vote. I'm going to vote with Representative Drazkowski, strange as that may be to some of you. I am. However, I do want to say that the years of experience have shown that getting rid of the 24-hour rule is not a panacea. A lot of things have been said here today that make it, again, sound like this is kind of the end of democracy. It's not. The whole issue about lobbyists and access by lobbyists, members, when we didn't have a 24-hour rule, the lobbyists had no less access. In fact, they had, I think, more access, because they drag you out in the hall, get you to file some amendment and bring it in and try to spring it on people. So all of the ills that have been brought up here pretty much are the same, whether we have a 24-hour rule or not. The transparency issue. I do kind of agree with what Representative Hertaus said about a constituent being able to contact us, text us, send us an email and say, oh my gosh, I didn't think about this issue. I need to make sure this tweak gets into the legislation, and then being able to do it. I think that's a good thing. I miss not being able to do that, and I think it's a loss. On the other hand, transparency is served by having the amendments posted ahead of time. That was the argument for it in the first place. So these things really do cut both ways. But the reason that I really would lean more still on the side of not having a 24-hour amendment rule is because I do think it's changed the culture of the Minnesota House. Now, let's be clear. there were always members who didn't pay attention. When some amendment came up, your assistant leader could run over to you and tell you how to vote. There would be notes passed, vote no on this one. So it doesn't mean that members are always paying attention or thinking, but it did allow for that in a way that now is really gone. It really made members be more mindful that they needed to listen to the debate. And I do think that now, because we do know ahead of time, or we can know ahead of time how we want to vote on an amendment, it does allow us to tune out in a way that I think is not as healthy as it should be. So I am going to vote with Representative Drazkowski. I'm going to vote yes on this amendment. And, you know, I know that we're going to go with the 24-hour rule again this session. And, you know, I'm not as opposed to it as I used to be, but I just wanted to give members that context. This is not a partisan issue. It's really, and so this is not a squelch the minority issue. I think the minority can, if the minority wants to delay, which is often the minority's function, it can, with or without a 24-hour rule. So, you know, that part of it, you know, these things really cut both ways. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. There's been a lot said. I just would say, urge or add my voice to support of this amendment. And I appreciate Representative Drazkowski bringing it forward. And I like to be in agreement once in a while with Representative Liebling. And I have talked to older representatives who aren't here anymore who didn't have the 24-hour rule. And I believe it is much more advantageous without it to us as representatives to represent our constituents. Examples have been given, and I would urge members to vote for this amendment. And I think it'll empower you, regardless of which side of the aisle, to represent your constituents better. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Munson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just wanted to add another part of this. This is a really good debate, and I'm really proud of the words that Representative Liebling said. And this is where we could actually say, well, how about 18 hours, or how about 10-hour rule, or how about, you know, this is where we could have a debate and actually improve what we're bringing forward instead of having to only be able to vote on what was filed yesterday. We can have this back and forth and actually work to improve legislation. I think this is really important. And I know that I've just been texted 3 people now. 2 of them had issues sending you an email for hands because they had to log back in using the text message you get from your email to do this. So I would ask, Madam Speaker, if we could ask for hands again. I know there's been a lot of people that have actually spoken in favor of this. I can't believe that there wouldn't be 15 members of this body who would be willing to be on the record, whether they vote yes or no, of how they vote. So I would ask for a roll call, Madam Speaker, if possible.
Apparently, it's not a one-shot wonder. You can ask a second time. So a roll call having been requested a second time, please send an email to hands@house.mn if you would like to support Representative Munson's request for a roll call.
And Madam Speaker, do I still have the floor?
We have to wait 60 seconds to see if we have 15 hands. There are 15 hands, so there will be a roll call. Representative Munson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for requesting a roll call. This is a really important vote, and I think that the fact that we had this before and it worked, we had members speak to the fact that it worked, the fact that the Senate also has this rule in effect where there's no 24-hour rule in the Senate, and we see a lot of bipartisan cooperation come out of the Senate. It's one of the reasons why the Senate passes so many bills on nearly unanimously, because they work to improve legislation in that body. I think that's that's so important. That's what our constituents ask of us. And I'd like to give this a shot this year. I think this would be wonderful. And please vote yes on the Drazkowski amendment. Thank you.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks to those members who have spoken in favor of the amendment, especially Representative Liebling. And Representative Liebling, it's almost like Sunday sales as every year for that one. You and I were always on the same team. Madam Speaker, by the way, just in members, I was one of the members who was unable to get their hands in on the 60-second hands. My email bounced back. Apparently, I mistyped it. So I appreciate Representative Munson asking again. But as I pointed out, and as Representative Liebling pointed out, this is not a partisan thing. There's not a Republican and a Democrat approach to this. I was opposed to this when it came through originally when Republicans brought it. When we re-upped it, if you will, the next biennium after Speaker Thiessen and the Democrats introduced it at that point. So it is not a partisan thing. It's one about what is best for us to operate as a legislature, bring about the best product for the people we represent, and give them, rather than the lobbyists, the best opportunity to influence the debate, discussion, and the outcome here in the Minnesota House of Representatives. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sorry, typically the person who brings the amendment is the last person to speak, but I overlooked a request to speak. The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Liebling, for your comments. Like Representative Liebling, I am a member who has opposed the 24-hour rule in both the minority and the majority. I do want to say I recognize that this amendment is not going to pass today, but I would hope that members in the future give this serious consideration. And I will provide a real-world example of how the 24-hour rule can squelch progress. In 2012, there was a contentious debate on the Viking Stadium bill. And myself and a group of legislators got together and we put together an amendment on the Viking Stadium bill that did three things. Number one, it made the Vikings pay more money for the stadium. Two, it reduced the amount of taxpayer funding that went into it. And number three, it made the Vikings responsible for any construction cost overruns. Now that amendment on the House floor got nearly 100 votes and became part of the final Viking Stadium deal. I can tell you that had we had the 24-hour rule in 2012, that amendment never would have saw the light of day. The Vikings, organized labor, organized business would have went after members, picked them off, and stopped it from happening. And that was a real world example of legislators working collaboratively to make things better. So again, I recognize this won't pass today, but in the future, I would hope that members who are around next term and in the future would revisit this issue. It does lead to a worse legislative product, and would hope that members support this amendment today and in the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'd like to clarify whether Representative Hertaus is seeking recognition a second time.
No, Madam Speaker, I didn't realize I had to lower my hand.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, a roll call having been requested, the clerk will take the roll.
Okay, I volunteered to be on the CAP board again.
Members who are using the fingerprint technology, please vote. But it doesn't say R next to his name.
Anderson. Anderson.
Anderson, aye.
Anderson, aye. Backer.
Backer, aye.
Backer, aye. Barr.
Barr, aye.
Barr, aye. Baker.
Baker, aye.
Baker, aye. Berg.
Berg, no.
Berg, no. Bierman.
Bierman, no.
Bierman, no. Bo.
Bo, aye.
Bo, aye. Christensen.
Christensen, no.
Christensen, no. Davids.
David's aye.
Davids, aye. Eklund.
No.
Eklund, no. Erickson.
Aye.
Erickson, aye. Feist.
Feist, no.
Feist, no. Grossel.
Russell, aye.
Grossel, aye. Gruenhagen.
Gruenhagen, aye.
Gruenhagen, aye. Haley.
Haley, aye.
Haley, aye. Hanson.
Hanson, R, no.
Hanson, R, no. Hausman.
Hausman, no.
Hausman, no. Heinrich.
Heinrich, aye.
Heinrich, aye. Cleavorn.
Cleaborn, no.
Cleavorn, no. Lee. Lee.
Lee, no.
Lee, no. Listlegard.
Listlegard, no.
Listlegard, no. Long.
Long, no.
Long, no. Mariani.
Mariani, no.
Mariani, no. Mason.
Mason, no.
Mason, no. Morrison.
Morrison, no.
Morrison, no. Mortensen.
Mortensen, aye.
Mortensen, aye. Murphy. Murphy. Novotny. Novotny.
Novotny, aye.
Novotny, aye. Palowski.
Pulowski, no.
Palowski, no. Sandell.
Sandell, no.
Sandell, no. Sundin.
Sundin, no.
Sundin, no. Thompson.
Thompson, no.
Thompson, no. Torkelson.
Torkelson, aye.
Torkelson, aye. Vang.
They no.
Vang, no. West.
West, aye.
West, aye. Zhang Ti.
Zhang Ti, no.
Zhang Ti, no. Joachim.
Joachim, no.
Joachim, no. Murphy.
Murphy, no.
Murphy, no.
Johnson is aye.
Johnson, aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 72 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Miller moves to amend the proposed permanent rules of the House for the 92nd session, and the amendment is coded A5.
The member from Candy, Ohio, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm going home and I'm not coming back and I don't.
Good leadership answers questions that are asked of them and do so without sarcasm, bullying, or disparaging the person who's asking the question. A quote I have from a man named James on leadership, and I don't know his last name. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good conduct, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast in it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom from above is first of all pure, then peace-loving, gentle, accommodating, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap the fruit of righteousness. I do not see the integrity and strong leadership and the heavy-handed policy of the Minnesota House regarding masks. I asked the majority leader to explain this earlier in the week, and in his response email, he went with what I see as his usual form of response by people asking these questions to attack and put me down. Someone among you then decided it was necessary to forward my email to a liberal quasi-news source so they could do more of the same. None of this is good leadership. I take no actual issue with the use of masks I wear one where appropriate based on CDC guidelines. But what I don't get are the inconsistencies I see in the policy surrounding their use here in the House of Representatives. My other amendment, which I won't be introducing today, called into consistency this rule by mandating proper use of actual safe masks and also forcing people to have their temperatures taken, washing hands, and staying 6 feet apart under the same penalties of the House. This would be consistent with CDC guidelines. It would be consistent in the rules. Now, you'll hear all sorts of rhetoric as to the efficacy of masks, but if you go to the CDC website, you will read articles in it that find cloth masks are at best 50% effective, gaiters not much at all, face shields they don't recognize, but more importantly, that the science is still out on this. So while I understand where wearing a mask is a good practice, but we also know that washing hands, keeping our distance, and taking our temperature before going into public is very effective as well. And yet these practices are not being pushed like masks by the House leadership. And so I wonder, where is the consistency? But that was my other amendment. This one deals with a more specific item, the vaccines. So my amendment simply says that if you provide proof that you've had the vaccine, you don't need to wear a mask in the legislature or in the House. Now, we're being told 2 vaccines, and I understand a third one is coming soon, are anywhere from 94 to 95% effective from contracting and therefore spreading the COVID virus. Now, this is great news. If masks are only 50% effective, 95% is much more effective. Now, I've been told by doctors and nurses that I've talked to that most other vaccines, so for like influenza, don't have anywhere near that effective level. So getting the vaccine, washing your hands regularly, taking your temperature, and if you don't feel well, stay at home. You should be in pretty good shape. But there's the masks, right? I expect someone to stand up after me and say, well, we'll still need to require masks. The virus could mutate, or we still need to be extra careful. And I know I'm going to hear something like that. Why? Because I believe we all know the lie. Now, the lie is not whether masks are effective. The lie is that the masks are for our safety. Because if that were the case, then when you get a vaccine, you won't need one, right? But we all know that that isn't the reason for them. Why wouldn't we also mandate the use of hand sanitizer, taking our temperatures, and keeping 6 feet apart under penalty of sanctions or termination? The lie is that masks are for your safety, when really the truth is that they are to muzzle you. By wearing one, you say, I'm conforming, or I am obeying. If not, why would you get fired or brought up on ethics charges for not wearing one? I think I'm going to be able to prove this lie today, because while a vaccine is 95% efficacy and we could no longer need draconian controls, I understand my amendment will likely be voted down, found out of order, or some other excuse as to why it should not be included. And so, Leader Winkler, you will win this one because you likely have the votes, but I'm sorry you'll not win on the truth here today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Miller, I was a little bit unclear whether you were pulling your amendment or not.
No, I asked for a vote, Madam Speaker.
Okay, thank you, Representative Miller. Did you request a roll call?
No, I did not.
Okay, Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, Representative Miller, if Representative Davids were here today, I'm sure he would jump up under Mason's and raise a point of order about my personality being in debate. But since he's not here, I'll just note that the Majority Leader is not an exception to personalities in debate. Madam Speaker, I move that the A5 amendment be referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. We are not putting any mask policies or vaccination policies into the permanent rules. It's a resolution in the Rules Committee related to human resource type policies, and that is the proper venue for this discussion. So I move that the A5 amendment be referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Madam Speaker, just as long as I can have final word, I can wait on that.
Representative Winkler moves to refer the A5 amendment to the Rules Committee. Discussion. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you. I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure that I have that opportunity. Representative Winkler, that's one of them that I refer to whenever I believe someone like you is challenged, and then suddenly we're wrong to challenge. You're a leader. If you won't remember this, but when I was elected when I first served in 2015, you were in the House, and I believe that you went after my personality pretty much every single week. Now, I was a freshman, so I didn't know any better, but I know that you have the majority, so you have the right to stand up and make this, and that point of order is going to be well taken. But I think that if members don't have at least a little bit of latitude, I didn't drone on and on about you or say I wondered this about you, or how come you do that, or something like that. There needs to be some points that we need to be able to make our point with. I believe earlier, I think it was in this week or maybe it was last week, that Representative Lucero kept getting interrupted on the same point, and I didn't hear him saying anything. And then we got told we can't use names in here. And so I just, I think if there's anything that people can agree with in this legislature is I try my best to come across as authentic, which can be gangly at times, or it can be annoying. But if we're going to have people that are authentic to say, this is what I think should be happening and how we should be doing it, and then it's a point of order. If I cross the line, I respect that. I didn't hear anything that questioned you other than I don't like your leadership. I've heard a lot worse in this House chamber about things that have happened here. I've heard like, you're outrageous. I was told by then Minority Leader Thiessen I was despicable because I brought something up. So while that's maybe not okay, the House floor should be an opportunity for people to be able to speak. If the things go way over the line, I think they should be spoken to. But I actually will respect and ask people, I don't know if there's even, I guess there is a vote because it's a motion. I'll support Representative Winkler's motion that this gets moved with his promise that we're going to be addressing these issues when we get it in there. And it's not just going to be buried in a committee. So I look forward to that. And Representative Winkler, I will support your motion with the word that you will promise that this will be discussed.
Any further discussion to the Winkler motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please say no.
No.
The motion prevails.
No.
The amendment has been referred to the Rules Committee. There are no further amendments at the desk. The question recurs on the Winkler motion to adopt the rules. Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, I request a roll call.
Representative Winkler requests a roll call, and one is automatic, I'm told. So, Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, the Chief Clerk is playing tricks on me. I ask members to support adoption of the rules and vote green.
I see no further discussion to the rules. The clerk will take the roll on the Winkler motion to adopt the permanent rules. Members, if you're attempting to use the fingerprint technology, please vote.
Backer.
Backer votes aye.
Backer, aye. Barr.
Barr, no.
Barr, no. Berg.
Berg, yes.
Berg, aye. Bierman.
Chairman, aye.
Bierman, aye. Bo.
Bo, aye.
Bo, aye. Christensen.
Christensen, aye.
Christensen, aye. Davids.
David's aye.
Davids, aye. Eklund.
Eklund, aye.
Eklund, aye. Erickson.
Erickson, no.
Erickson, no. Feist.
Heist, aye.
Feist, aye. Grossel.
Grossel, no.
Grossel, no. Gruenhagen.
Gruenhagen, no.
Gruenhagen, no. Haley.
Haley, aye.
Haley, aye. Hanson.
Hanson, aye.
Hanson, aye. Hausman.
Houseman, aye.
Hausman, aye. Heinrich.
Heinrich, no.
Heinrich, no. Johnson.
Johnson, aye.
Johnson, aye. Cleavorn.
Seaborn, aye.
Cleavorn, aye. Lee.
Lee, aye.
Lee, aye. Lislegard.
Listlegard, aye.
Lislegard, aye. Mariani.
Mariani, aye.
Mariani, aye. Mason.
Mason, aye.
Mason, aye. Morrison.
Morrison, aye.
Street parking since.
Morrison, aye. Mortensen.
Mortensen, no.
Mortensen, no. Murphy.
Murphy, aye.
Murphy, aye. Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Sandell.
Sandell, aye.
Sandell, aye. Sundin.
Sundin, aye.
Sundin, aye. Thompson.
Thompson, aye.
Thompson, aye. Vang.
Bang, aye.
Vang, aye. West.
West, no.
West, no. Zhang Ti.
Long T, aye.
Zhang Ti, aye. Joachim.
Joachim, aye.
Joachim, aye. Perfect.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 104 ayes and 27 nays, the motion prevails. The permanent rules are adopted.